Death in ancient Egypt was not simply an end. It was the most important event of a person's life. From the moment someone was born, their existence was measured against the inevitability of death and the hope of eternity. Every social class, from pharaohs to peasants, prepared for the journey beyond. The afterlife was real. It was feared. And it was controlled by strict rituals, powerful priests, and unbroken traditions that lasted millennia. The Egyptians believed the soul had several components: the Ka, the Ba, the Ak, and the shadow. Each had to survive death in order for a person to achieve eternal life. The body was the anchor for the soul. If the body decayed, the soul could not live. This belief drove the creation of mummies, elaborate tombs, and endless funerary rituals. Mummification was more than preservation. It was a sacred duty. The process was meticulous, dangerous, and often grotesque. First, the body was washed and purified. Then the internal organs were removed: lungs, stomach, intestines, and liver, each treated carefully and stored in canopic jars, guarded by protective gods. The heart often remained inside the body, for it was considered the seat of thought and emotion. The brain, however, was discarded. It was deemed unnecessary, a simple mass of tissue. The body was then dehydrated using natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture. This process took weeks. Every organ, every cavity, every fold of skin was carefully treated. Resin and oils were applied to prevent decay, and the body was wrapped layer by layer in linen. These wrappings were not just practical, they were ritualistic. Amulets were placed between layers, each with a protective purpose. Prayers, spells, and incantations were recited to ensure the deceased's safe passage to the afterlife. The tomb itself was as important as the mummification. Walls were decorated with texts and illustrations from the Book of the Dead, guiding the soul through the underworld. False doors, statues, and treasures were placed to provide the soul with a home and sustenance. For pharaohs, the scale of death was enormous. The great pyramids, tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and elaborate funerary complexes were built at immense cost. Laborers, craftsmen, and priests worked for decades to ensure the king's journey was secure. But even ordinary Egyptians participated in these rituals. Wealthier families could afford decorated coffins and small tombs. Poor families used simpler burials, but the belief in the afterlife remained universal. Death was feared not only for its finality, but for its consequences. Failing the rituals, being buried incorrectly, or having the body damaged could prevent the soul from reaching eternal life. Grave robbers, floods, and disease threatened this journey as much as death itself. Magic and spells were everywhere. From the moment of death, priests performed rites to protect the deceased from demons, crocodiles, serpents, and other dangers in the underworld. Every step in the journey was guided by sacred texts, recited aloud, and carefully choreographed. Despite this elaborate care, death remained grim. Mortality was constant, visible, and immediate. Even the wealthy, surrounded by rituals and protections, could fall victim to disease, accidents, or violence. But the fear of death gave rise to one of humanity's most extraordinary cultural achievements. Mummification, tomb construction, and funerary magic created a civilization obsessed with life after death, leaving behind monuments that still awe the world today. After the body was prepared, the focus shifted to the tomb. The Egyptians believed the tomb was the soul's eternal home. Without it, the ka could not survive, and the deceased would wander, lost and powerless. Tombs varied in size and complexity.
For pharaohs, entire valleys were carved into limestone cliffs, hidden from intruders, filled with treasures, statues, and elaborate inscriptions. For ordinary people, graves were simpler pits or mud brick chambers, but each was carefully oriented and placed near sacred ground. The walls of the tomb were more than decoration. They were a roadmap for the soul. Scenes depicted offerings, gods, and magical spells. Each symbol, each painting, had a precise meaning. Failure to reproduce these rituals could trap the soul in limbo. The afterlife itself was envisioned as a series of challenges. The deceased faced tests in the underworld, including encounters with demons, crocodiles, serpents, and gates guarded by fearsome gods. Their passage depended on proper rituals, spells, and the strength of their moral actions in life. Central to this journey was the weighing of the heart. The deceased's heart was measured against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and balance. If the heart was heavier than the feather, weighed down by sin and cruelty, the soul was devoured by Amit, the monstrous eater of the dead. This concept instilled a moral code, linking life and death in a terrifying way. Funerary texts, like the Book of the Dead, served as guides for navigating these perils. They contained incantations to open doors, repel monsters, and instruct the deceased on how to speak to gods. Failure to recite them correctly, either in life or through priestly intervention, could mean eternal torment. Magic was woven into every step of mummification and burial. Amulets, charms, and statues were placed strategically to protect the soul. Priests chanted spells and recited prayers, invoking divine power to preserve, protect, and guide. Even the placement of food, drink, and personal belongings mattered. The Egyptians believed the soul could consume symbolic offerings. Without bread, beer, or small luxuries, the spirit would suffer hunger in the afterlife.
Without tools or jewelry, it would be powerless and weak. Yet death remained frighteningly tangible. Disease, violence, famine, and accidents could strike at any moment. Mummification and burial were a hedge against mortality, a small attempt to control what was ultimately uncontrollable. The scale of preparation varied with wealth and status. Pharaohs could command decades of labor for massive pyramids, elaborate tombs, and thousands of rituals. Craftsmen, priests, and laborers worked tirelessly, knowing their efforts determined whether the king's soul would achieve eternity. Even the smallest error could doom the pharaoh's journey. Ordinary Egyptians, though lacking pyramids, were equally invested in the afterlife. Simple graves were augmented with amulets, figurines, and painted inscriptions. Families sacrificed animals, poured libations, and recited spells to support the dead. Death was not the end, it was a continuation of responsibility. Children were instructed in these rituals early. The knowledge of life and death, of proper conduct and offerings, was a form of survival. Failing the rites was worse than dying. It was spiritual annihilation. Time itself was marked by death. Festivals honored the dead. Priests maintained eternal prayers. Even centuries later, Egyptians believed these rituals continued to hold power. Mummification and burial were expensive, exhausting and often grisly. Bodies were stripped, eviscerated, dehydrated, wrapped, and adorned. Yet the Egyptians endured this labor across millennia because the stakes were eternal. The reality of death was harsh. The afterlife was perilous. Mummification was intricate, grotesque, and sacred. But through this terrifying process, ancient Egyptians created a culture obsessed with eternity, morality, and divine order. Their monuments, tombs, and rituals still awe the modern world.
Yet behind the grandeur lay fear, sacrifice, and the constant reminder: life was fleeting, and only preparation could offer a chance at immortality. Death was universal, inescapable, and immediate. But the hope of surviving it, through careful rituals, mummification, and devotion, was powerful enough to shape an entire civilization. Ancient Egypt thrived not despite death, but because of it. Fear, reverence, and meticulous care for the dead gave birth to some of the greatest cultural achievements in human history. Every tomb, every spell, every wrapped mummy was a testament to one truth. In Egypt, life and death were inseparable, and eternity demanded preparation.